For thousands of years, humans have been doing something that sounds impossible. Building cities without modern machines. Crossing oceans without maps. Creating technology that still surprises engineers today. And then, we forgot. Not because these achievements were small, not because they failed, but because history is fragile. A civilization can disappear. A language can become unreadable. A technique can stop being passed down. And suddenly, something that was once obvious to thousands of people becomes a mystery to everyone else. The strangest part about history is not discovering that humans were capable of incredible things. The strangest part is discovering how many incredible things we almost lost. Because the people who came before us were not simply trying to survive. They were solving problems. They were experimenting. They were inventing. And sometimes they were doing things that would still be impressive today. When people think about ancient engineering, they usually imagine famous places. The pyramids of Egypt, the roads of Rome, the temples of Greece. But hidden in southern Africa is a city that deserves to stand beside them. A city made from hundreds of thousands of carefully placed stones. A city that connected an inland kingdom to global trade networks. A city that was built by people many outside observers once refused to believe could have created it. This was Great Zimbabwe. And the first thing that makes Great Zimbabwe remarkable is not what it looks like. It is what it proves. Because Great Zimbabwe destroys one of the oldest assumptions people have about the ancient world. The idea that advanced engineering only belonged to a few famous civilizations. Between roughly the 11th and 15th centuries, Great Zimbabwe became the center of a powerful society in southern Africa. At its peak, thousands of people lived there. The city contained enormous stone structures, including the Great Enclosure, whose walls reached around 11 meters high. And these walls were built without mortar. No concrete holding everything together. No modern construction equipment. Just carefully shaped stones placed together with remarkable precision. Basically, imagine building a giant wall and deciding every single rock has to fit perfectly. Good luck. It sounds like the kind of challenge humans create when normal construction is apparently not difficult enough. But the walls were only part of the achievement. Great Zimbabwe was also a center of trade. Archaeologists have discovered evidence that the people living there were connected to wider networks reaching across the Indian Ocean. Objects from distant regions, including imported glass beads and Chinese porcelain, show that this was not an isolated city. It was connected to the world. And that creates the first major lesson of this story. Sometimes history does not forget things because they were unimportant. Sometimes history forgets things because the people who created them did not leave behind the kind of records we expect. The people of Great Zimbabwe preserved knowledge through oral traditions, stories, songs, generations of memory. And this was not a weakness. For thousands of years, oral traditions helped humans preserve information without writing. But they depended on people. If the people carrying that knowledge disappeared, the knowledge became much harder to recover. And that is what makes Great Zimbabwe so fascinating. The mystery is not, how could humans build something this impressive? The evidence already answers that. Humans could. The mystery is, how did the memory of something this impressive almost disappear? But Great Zimbabwe was not the only civilization that achieved something extraordinary and left us with unanswered questions. Because sometimes humans do not lose knowledge because nobody wrote it down. Sometimes they lose knowledge because nobody can read what was written. And few examples are more frustrating than the Indus Valley civilization. Thousands of years ago, across parts of modern-day Pakistan and India, a civilization was building cities with systems that seem surprisingly familiar. Organized streets, standardized bricks, complex architecture, and one of the most advanced sanitation systems of the ancient world. Many Indus Valley cities had carefully designed drainage networks. Homes had access to wells. Public bathing areas existed. At a time when many ancient settlements were still struggling with basic urban organization, the Indus Valley civilization was already thinking about something that every modern city still cares about. How do millions of people live together? And that is the incredible part. They were not just building bigger, they were building smarter. But then we reach one of the biggest locked doors in human history. The Indus people left behind writing. Hundreds of symbols have been discovered on seals, pottery, and other objects. The problem? We cannot confidently understand what they say. The Indus script remains undeciphered, and that means an entire civilization is sitting in front of us with its voice turned off. Imagine finding someone's entire computer. Every folder is there, every file exists, but every password is missing. You know there is valuable information inside. You just cannot open it. That is the situation with the Indus Valley civilization. We know they traded. We know they built cities. We know they created sophisticated systems. But we still do not know many of the details that make a civilization feel human. What stories did they tell? Who were their leaders? What events changed their society? What ideas shaped their world? Thousands of years of human experience are trapped behind symbols we have not learned how to read. And that is what makes this achievement so remarkable. The Indus Valley civilization did not disappear because it was unsuccessful. It disappeared from our understanding because one of the keys to its knowledge is still missing. But cities are not the only way humans have achieved the impossible. Sometimes the greatest achievement is not building something. It is finding a way across something that looks impossible to cross. For most of human history, the Pacific Ocean was one of the greatest barriers on Earth. Thousands of kilometers of open water, no landmarks, no roads, no obvious path. And yet, Polynesian navigators crossed it. Not with satellites, not with GPS, not with modern navigation systems. With knowledge. They learned how to read the ocean itself, the stars, the movement of waves, the direction of winds, the behavior of birds. To modern people, this sounds almost unbelievable. Imagine someone telling you, "Good news. We are going to cross an ocean using a boat, the sky, and a song our grandparents taught us." That sounds less like navigation and more like the world's most stressful family tradition. But it worked. For generations, Polynesian navigators traveled across the Pacific and settled islands separated by enormous distances. They were not randomly drifting. They were following a sophisticated understanding of the environment. The ocean was not empty. It was full of information, and they knew how to read it. Their knowledge was often passed down through oral traditions. Songs could contain directions. Stories could preserve environmental information. Memory itself became a navigation system. And that might be one of the most impressive human achievements of all. Because a modern person looking at the Pacific Ocean sees distance. A Polynesian navigator saw a map. But there is another reason the Polynesian story matters. Because it shows that human achievement is not always preserved in the places we expect. Sometimes the greatest technology is not a machine. Sometimes it is knowledge living inside people. And when that knowledge is forgotten, humanity can lose something that took thousands of years to create. Which brings us to one of the biggest examples of lost human achievement in history. Not one city, not one invention, an entire interconnected world. Around 1200 BC, some of the most powerful civilizations on Earth entered a period of collapse. This was the end of the Bronze Age. And before everything fell apart, the ancient Mediterranean was incredibly advanced. Egypt, the Hittite Empire, Mycenaean Greece, large cities connected by trade, governments managing huge populations, writing systems recording information, specialists creating weapons, tools, and architecture. This was not a world of isolated villages. It was a connected international system. Resources moved between regions. Ideas spread. Technologies improved. In many ways, this was an ancient version of globalization. And that was both its greatest strength and its greatest weakness. Because when everything is connected, a problem in one place can become a problem everywhere. Think about a modern supply chain. A disruption thousands of kilometers away can affect people who have never even heard of the original problem. Now imagine that entire system depends on ancient ships, harvests, weather patterns, and political stability. That was the Bronze Age world, and eventually, the system broke. The exact reason is still debated. There may have been droughts, food shortages, political instability, wars, invasions, but the collapse was probably not caused by one single disaster. It was more like a chain reaction. One problem weakened the system. That weakness created more problems. And eventually, societies that had existed for centuries began to fall apart. Cities were abandoned. Trade routes disappeared. And one of the most important things was lost: information. Because civilizations do not only store knowledge in books, they store it in institutions, in specialists, in traditions, in people who know how everything works. When those systems collapse, knowledge can disappear faster than anyone expects. A city can be rebuilt. A monument can be discovered. But once a language, skill, or tradition disappears, it can be gone forever. And that might be the most painful part of the Bronze Age collapse. The things we know about this period are only fragments. There were people who understood their world in ways we will never fully recover. They knew their cities, their stories, their inventions, their solutions. And much of that knowledge vanished with them. But the story of human achievement does not end with loss. Because sometimes we lose knowledge, and then centuries later, we find it again. One of the strangest examples of this comes from something that seems completely ordinary: concrete. Today, concrete is everywhere. Buildings, roads, bridges. Modern civilization is basically held together by this gray material. But thousands of years ago, Roman builders created a version of concrete that still surprises researchers today. Some Roman structures have survived for nearly 2,000 years. Massive ports, harbors, buildings, structures exposed to water and weather that should have damaged them long ago. And scientists have spent years studying why some Roman concrete has lasted so incredibly well. The answer is not that Romans had some secret futuristic technology. They did not. They were not secretly building with materials from the future. The truth is more interesting. They understood their environment. They experimented with materials. They observed what worked. And over generations, they developed construction techniques that matched the problems they were trying to solve. They did not have modern chemistry. They did not have computer models. They did not have thousands of years of scientific research behind them. They had curiosity, observation, and experience, which is something humans have always had. The ability to look at a difficult problem and think, there has to be another way. And that is why ancient achievements are so fascinating. Not because ancient people were somehow identical to modern engineers. They were not. Their tools were different. Their resources were different. Their challenges were different. But their creativity was the same. And maybe that is the greatest achievement humanity almost forgot. Not a city, not a language, not a technology. It is the ability of ordinary humans to create extraordinary solutions. Because when we look back at history, we often focus on what survived. The famous civilizations, the famous inventions, the famous names. But survival is not the same thing as importance. Some of the most incredible things humans have ever done were created by people whose names we will never know. The builders who placed every stone in Great Zimbabwe. The engineers who designed the cities of the Indus Valley. The navigators who crossed oceans by reading the sky. The people who built civilizations that later generations only know through fragments. They were not less intelligent because history forgot them. They were not less creative because their records disappeared. They were humans, just like us, trying to understand the world, trying to solve problems, trying to build something that would last. And maybe the biggest lesson from all of these forgotten achievements is that human progress was never a straight line. It was never simply, people in the past knew less. People today know more. History is much more complicated than that. Knowledge can be created. Knowledge can be lost. Knowledge can be rediscovered. And somewhere beneath the ground, hidden inside ancient symbols or preserved in forgotten traditions, there are probably still pieces of the human story waiting to be found. Because the greatest mystery in history is not only what humans have done, it is how much humans have done that we almost forgot.